Another important day is coming up on April 25th, World Malaria Day. Joining us now is In Focus Health correspondent Linord Moudou. Linord, you're of course focusing on malaria today.
That's right, Vincent. A new report says about $1.8 billion was spent in the fight against malaria in Africa last year, more than 6 times the amount spent in 2004. The joint report by the UN Children's Fund and the Rollback Malaria Initiative says despite the increase though in outside funding, spending is still falling far short of the estimated $6 billion a year needed to control the disease. DDT is one of the most well-known synthetic pesticides used to control diseases such as malaria. It is also used as an agricultural insecticide. But over the years, some controversy has surrounded the use of DDT. Many argue that the pesticide has a negative impact on the environment, animals, and humans. In a new book entitled The Excellent Powder, co-author Richard Trent says no scientific study has ever proven that DDT exposure is harmful.
Well, the book is what we think is the ultimate response to Rachel Carson and others that have claimed that DDT, an insecticide used in public health, causes great harm to the environment and to humans. Over the years, over many decades, there have been many thousands of studies into DDT. So far, none have found any harm to human health. None of the studies comply with the most basic criteria to prove a cause and effect relationship. Throughout, you have to remember that you have enormous and ongoing threats from malaria. We have to balance risks, and the risk of malaria is far worse than any risk from insecticides.
And speaking of malaria control, several issues have been raised, including the need to sustain funding. With the global economic downturn, some worry that future funding to ensure universal coverage of malaria control and intervention might be in jeopardy. To discuss this and other issues is Sunil Mehra, Executive Director of the Malaria Consortium. Mr. Mehra, welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
The joint report by UNICEF and Rollback Malaria says that there has been an increase indeed in terms of funding, but they say the funds are still not enough. So what is going to happen in light of this in light of the global economic crisis?
I think the few good interventions have taken place. One is that the diversification of funding sources. I mean, there was a lot of dependence on funding from very few sources, and that will fill some of the gap. I think we are also seeing efficiencies within the systems for delivery of getting things to people where they need them, and that's improving things. I think the gap in funding really relates to that we don't have a problem that can be solved overnight. It's a problem that needs long-term, continued, sustained, not only funding, but more importantly, political commitment at the international level, but just as important at country level, where the problem still exists.
So what type of political commitment are you looking for?
I think first and foremost, I mean, ideally what we'd like is there is a shift that takes place within the domestic funding within each of these countries. So their budgets are directed more towards what I would call the top 5, top 10 problems that the country people suffer from. And currently, malaria tops within that category. So if the domestic funding correlates directly to the level of problems, then I think malaria will and should get the attention till we reach a point and we can say, okay, we have finally conquered this disease.
Now let's talk about a different issue, which is the issue of mosquitoes' resistance to insecticides, such as those used in bed nets. What is this? Why is this happening?
I'm not an expert or an entomologist. Why it's happening is very similar to other resistance, that in this case the mosquito is exposed to a pesticide over a long time, and gradually its own genetic structure begins to sort of adapt to kind of what it's been attacked by. So it's a survival instinct of the mosquito. And I think what we're seeing now is a turning point in that today we are a bit more confident than we used to be because investments are taking place to find the alternatives that would help us to carry this fight from malaria in the future.
So can we say that it is time to invest in some research to find new insecticides?
It's taking place, and I think more funding is needed, because I think what we're looking at, the current generation that's been used, is actually effective. We're also looking at different ways of delivering it, so it's not reliant totally only on one form, one insecticide to achieve our goals. There is investment that is taking place, but a lot of it is actually coming from foundations like the Gates Foundation. We need additional funding coming from other sources.
Okay, Mr. Mehra, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Sure. And that was Mr. Mehra with the Malaria Consortium. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Linord, for joining us today. Be sure to watch for Linord Moudou every Tuesday and Thursday for the latest health news in Africa right here on In Focus.